topic is Ma'at Ubuntu Jama, towards a Ma'at Ubuntu Man, the human rights repair of African heritage communities in Europe by way of holistic and transformative reparations. Bit of a mouthful, but essentially the concept of Ma'at Ujama, Ma'at Ubuntu Jama, is a sense of a community. It is the African heritage community that is a community that's made up of diverse African communities as we are represented in Europe. And Ma'at Ubuntu Man is the future Pan-African superstate. So that's just to give you an indication as to what I'm going to be talking about and how that links to the topic of reparations. But before I go any further, it's important for me not to make any assumptions because speaking in English, which is not my mother tongue, but obviously a colonial language, whenever the term reparations gets used or translated, it's often reduced to being synonymous with just financial compensation. And so I just need to explain that reparations is a lot more than money, okay? So under international law, according to the basic principles and guidelines on a right to a remedy and reparations for victims of gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law, there are 5 key aspects to reparations under international law. The first being restitution, which is essentially to put a people or a group who've experienced historical oppression back in the situation that they would have been in, i.e. African people would have been in were it but for enslavement, colonialism, genocide, racism, etc., etc. And that's not necessarily going back to the 14th century or the 15th century, but it is looking at what would our societies have been like but for this massive interruption in our own people's process of making history and developing ourselves. It also includes, under international law, compensation, which is where most people start when they think about reparations. But compensation is not just about money. Compensation is about putting a financial value on damage or harm or injury, on violations, human and people's rights violations. Rehabilitation, I'm just rushing through very quickly the principles of reparations under international law. Rehabilitation, which is not really defined in law, but it's self-explanatory. It's all those measures that need to be put in place to rehabilitate a group, a population, a nation, a people who have experienced enslavement, colonialism, neo-colonialism. So that includes many measures, including access to psychotherapeutic interventions, community building, community strengthening and integration, as well as many other different projects and programs. And then there is satisfaction, and satisfaction is an interesting remedy because it includes all those measures that would need to be put in place so that the group affected, and in this case we're talking about African people, feel satisfied that there has been some level of redress and repair. And that might include punishing perpetrators, stopping multinational corporations from resource extraction in terms of exploitative, extractive industries. It might include changes to curriculums and rewriting the national history and so forth. And then Principle 5, which is the most, I think, unrecognized and underemphasized, and that is guarantees of non-repetition, which incorporate cessation of the continuing violations. So principle 5 are guarantees of non-repetition. How do we ensure, how do we change the system in such a way that enslavement, colonialism, neo-colonialism, and all the other ills that we have been concerning ourselves with never happen again? Not just to African people, but in terms of the world that we inhabit, that we share with other members of the human family. And obviously that is a huge challenge. And cessation of violations. How do we repair effectively when the harm is still continuing? You cannot effectively be repaired or even secure reparations whilst the damage is still being done. And so we in PARCO, the Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, that I represent in terms of my activist hat, we have a quote that says, "Receiving the financial component of reparations will be meaningful only if it serves the holistic purpose and strengthens the integral whole of our self-repair process." So the key thing to know is that reparations involve an external process, which I can say very simply as what others owe us, others, in terms of nations, corporations, and so forth. And then there's an internal dimension to reparations, which is what we, the African people who have experienced different forms of oppression, owe ourselves, and what we have to do by way of exercising our own agency and re-establishing and asserting our self-determination to be the change that we wish to see. That is an integral part of any reparations process, which must result in the re-establishment and the transformation of the group or people that have experienced various forms of historical injustice. So transformation is key. It is not about just replicating oppressors and saying, well, everyone else has got theirs, we want to get ours. It actually involves a challenge